Have you ever stopped to think about what needs to happen in an anime episode for it to get close to a perfect score on IMDb? I'm not talking about 8.0, not even 9.0, which would already be extraordinary. I'm talking about 9.8, a number that makes you look at the screen twice, scroll back up thinking you misread it, and then just sit there for a few seconds processing. Because IMDb is brutal. The platform has users who rate Breaking Bad with 6 stars because it was too slow. There are people who tanked legendary Game of Thrones episodes out of pure fan-base spite. It's a battlefield of opinions, egos, and shattered expectations. And yet, through all of that noise, the 3rd episode of ReZero Season 4 cut straight through and landed at 9.8 on IMDb. Let that sink in for a second. Not every show does this. We're talking about a level that places this episode on an extremely short list of television deliveries that simply devastated audiences to the point of near unanimous consensus. And the most fascinating part? It's not a finale. It's not a 1-hour special. It's the 3rd episode of a season that was only just beginning to show what it was capable of. But to understand why Episode 3 of S4 reached that absurd number, you need to understand where ReZero stood before it. Because this episode didn't come out of nowhere. It was built on years of trust, pain, and expectation. ReZero came back in 2026 with the riskiest mission in its history so far. After a 3rd season that, let's be honest, divided the fanbase a little, those who loved the Pristella arc and those who felt the pacing was sometimes uneven, the series arrived at Season 4 carrying a promise that light novel readers had been making for years. Arc 6, known as the Pleiades Watchtower arc, would be different from anything the anime had ever shown. The reader said this with a small smile in the corner of their mouths, that smile of someone who knows something you don't yet. And it's that smile that made anime fans approach each episode with a mix of curiosity and quiet dread. Arc 6 isn't just emotionally brutal, it's psychologically different. It hits in a way you can't prepare for because the author, Tappei Natsugi, built something that breaks the very internal logic you'd learn to trust inside ReZero. And Episode 3 was the moment the anime finally pulled the trigger on that. The title of S4 Episode 3 is The Keeper of the Watchtower. Subaru's group has reached the Pleiades Tower, that absurd structure standing in the middle of the Auguria Desert, the place that supposedly holds some form of knowledge capable of saving Ram and the others who were destroyed by the authority of gluttony. But before the group can even properly process where they are, things fall apart. A fall separates Subaru from nearly everyone else. When he wakes, he's with Ram. Patrasha the Earth Dragon is with them too. And it's almost a relief because Subaru clearly feels certain that Patrasha won't betray him. But Ram is not exactly walking emotional comfort. Ram is sharp, direct, and in this episode she carries a weight that goes beyond her usual demeanor. Because Rem is sleeping, Rem was devoured, and Ram lost a sister she spent her whole life protecting, and now she's standing next to the man who, from Ram's perspective, always seems to be at the center of everything that goes wrong. That alone would be enough material for a dense episode, but ReZero didn't stop there. The tower itself begins to reveal its logic, and the tower's logic is terrifying because it appears rational on the surface but hides a structural cruelty underneath. Each floor has rules, each step forward has a cost, and the episode starts to make it clear that Subaru, who has the return by death ability, that power he's always used as a last anchor against despair, may not work the same way here. Stop. Read that again. Return by death, which is literally what defines Subaru's identity as a protagonist, what makes him the guy who keeps trying even when he dies, even when everything collapses, because he can always come back. That anchor starts to feel unstable inside the tower. And the episode doesn't need to say that explicitly. It builds the feeling, through Subaru's expression when something doesn't feel right, through the way the animation chooses to frame the tower's corridors, angular, with perspectives that distort slightly, as if the space itself is telling you the rules here are different. White Fox did a visual work that goes beyond just pretty. It's a cinematic language that deliberately puts the viewer in the wrong headspace on purpose. And then comes the scene that broke the fandom. I won't describe it in full detail to avoid spoiling it for those who haven't watched yet, but there's a moment in this episode involving Ram, involving a revelation about her emotional state that had been suppressed for seasons, and involving Subaru being forced to confront a version of himself he tries not to see. It's not an action scene. There's no spectacular special effect. It's two people in a hallway, with the animation slowing down almost imperceptibly and silence filling the space where a score would normally be. That silence is calculated. It forces you to focus on the vocal performance, the micro expressions of the characters, the word that was chosen, and the one that was deliberately left out. And it's in that silent space that the episode hits you. It's the kind of thing that makes the viewer pause, stare at a frozen screen for a few seconds, and then quietly say, "Man," to nobody in particular. You know that moment when an anime episode makes you react alone in your room like someone's sitting next to you? That's what this was. Some people will say IMDb ratings don't mean anything, that it's easy to inflate with an organized fan-based voting campaign. And fair enough, that argument exists and holds water in some cases. But something different is happening here. ReZero has a fan base that knows what quality looks like because the show has delivered historic episodes before. That same fan base has given average scores to filler episodes or slower pace ones. They don't inflate by default. They inflate when something genuinely shook what they were expecting. And the context in which episode 3 arrived reinforces that. Season 4 started slowly on purpose. The first 2 episodes were world building, character reintroductions, atmosphere setting. A lot of people were restless, light novel readers holding their breath, anime fans waiting to see if White Fox could capture what makes Arc 6 hit so hard on the page. Episode 3 was the answer, and it was such a clear, direct answer that the IMDb number became almost a collective confirmation. Yes, it's here. It's happening. This anime is entering a different level. Think of it like a camera that shifts perspective in a film. You've been watching a story from a certain angle for seasons, and suddenly, without warning, the camera turns and reveals there was a depth behind what you thought was the background. It's not just that the characters got better, or the animation got more elaborate. It's that the arc's narrative structure itself reveals something about the characters that makes everything you saw before simultaneously more painful and more beautiful. Ram, for example. How many of us watched Ram for entire seasons as that cold, efficient, slightly arrogant character who exists in orbit around Rem and Roswaal? How many of us, without realizing it, were only ever seeing the surface? Episode 3 doesn't rewrite Ram. It just forces you to see what was always there, the fracture she never let anyone look at directly. And White Fox understood that this kind of revelation can't be loud. It can't be an orchestral score swelling while the character cries in a cinematically flattering way. It needs to be restrained. It needs to be the kind of pain that doesn't allow itself dramaturgy, because characters like Ram don't do that favor for themselves. And that's exactly why the scene hurts as much as it does. There's also the element of genuine horror that the arc begins introducing here. ReZero has always had psychological horror, the death loop, Subaru's existential isolation, the inability to share the weight he carries. But the Pleiades Watchtower arc adds a layer of atmospheric horror. The tower isn't simply dangerous, it's strange in a way that triggers a sense of threat you can't quite name. It's like that feeling from a nightmare where there's no visible monster, but you know something is there, and that's somehow worse. And when the animation captures that correctly, and episode 3 does, you get something rare. Horror that actually works in anime. No jump scares, no gratuitous gore. The right atmosphere doing the work that the text does in the light novel, but in visual language. All of that combined produced that 9.8. It wasn't a voting campaign. It was a fan base, in sync, watching the same episode, feeling the same thing, and expressing it in the only objective form available to them. Episode 3 of S4 is not the peak of the season, and that needs to be said with complete clarity, because it might sound absurd. How is an episode with a 9.8 on IMDb not the peak? Because Arc 6 still has more. A lot more. Light novel readers are careful not to spoil things, but the consistency with which they talk about what's coming carries a tone that blends pride with a certain pity, like someone who knows you're about to go through something difficult and can't prepare you, because part of the impact comes from the surprise. They say, just wait until you get there, with the same tone a doctor uses when they say, this is going to sting a little before the injection. And you know what confirms that? Episode 8 of the same season has already reached 9.9 on IMDb. Yes, the episode the community was celebrating as historic in April has already been surpassed by the arc itself in May. That doesn't diminish episode 3. On the contrary, it shows we're watching a season that raised the bar and refused to come back down. Every time the fandom thought it had seen the best, the show presented something that made that best look like the warm-up. For those watching the anime without having read the light novel, episode 3 was a warning. That feeling you got, whether it was discomfort, emotional impact, the sense that this show is doing something different, it's going to intensify. Not gratuitously, not because Teppei Nagataki enjoys making the audience suffer for suffering's sake, but because this arc is about loss in a specific, surgical way. Not the loss of a confrontation, the loss of things that characters were using as anchors without even realizing it. The certainty of how the world works, confidence in specific abilities, the assumption that certain bonds are permanent. Subaru is going to be tested in a way this show had never done before. And I'm not talking about the number of times he dies in a loop. I'm talking about the quality of what is emotionally demanded of a character who has already suffered more than enough to become who he is. That's what the 9.8 represents, if you look beyond the number. It represents a fandom recognizing that the show they had loved for years had finally reached the moment it was built for, that the previous seasons, with all their highs and lows, were paving the road to exactly this, that the characters you watch growing, breaking, rebuilding themselves are now at the most crucial moment of their stories, and the anime has both the technical and emotional ability to do it justice. Episode 3 of ReZero Season 4 is not just a great anime episode, it's an episode that will be remembered as the moment the anime finally took the light novel reader's hand on one side, extended its other hand to the anime fan on the other hand, and introduced them to each other, saying, now you're both seeing the same thing. And that's something that rarely happens in any adaptation. So here's the question, and I'll leave it with you to carry while you wait for the next episode. If episode 3 was the beginning of the horror, if the 9.8 was the fandom saying, this is finally what I was waiting for, what exactly are the light novel readers smiling about when they say the worst or the best is still yet to come?